Rain fell like cold silver threads from the dark night sky. The marketplace was almost empty, except for a few buyers walking slowly between the cages. Each cage was lit by a single flickering light, showing the trapped faces of different alien species. Some shouted for help, some tried to look strong, others begged for food. In the farthest corner, almost hidden in shadows, a small alien girl sat quietly. Her knees were pulled to her chest, her thin arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her silver eyes looked at the wet ground. No one noticed her tears, not even the traders standing nearby. She was too small to be of value. The traders had decided she was damaged goods after an injury to her leg. They didn't even bother trying to sell her first. Instead, they placed her in the corner, waiting for the end of the night, and maybe the end of her life. Buyers passed by without looking at her. A big alien merchant laughed, saying, "That one is worthless, can't even stand." Another one said, "Throw her to the dogs, she's no use." The girl's hands tightened around her legs. She tried not to cry, but the tears kept falling silently. From the other side of the market, a human man named Ethan walked in. He wasn't here to buy a slave. He only came for spare machine parts from a trader he knew. But the sound of the rain mixed with a faint, soft sound, a sound like a child sobbing. It was so quiet most people wouldn't notice, but Ethan did. He turned his head and saw her, a tiny figure in the shadows. Silver eyes shining with tears, she looked away quickly, afraid that if she met his gaze, he would laugh at her too, for a moment. Ethan thought about walking past. It wasn't his business. But something inside him told him to stop. Slowly, he stepped toward the corner. The trader nearest to her smirked. "You don't want that one?" "Human," he said. "She's broken. Can't walk properly. Maybe not even talk right." Worthless, Ethan ignored him and crouched near the cage. The girl's shoulders stiffened, her eyes darting to his face for just a second, up close. He could see she was shivering from the cold. Her clothes were thin, soaked by rainwater dripping through the roof. "Why are you crying?" he asked quietly. The girl blinked, confused. No one had asked her that before. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her voice was lost in fear. The trader laughed. "She won't answer you. Probably too scared or too stupid. If you're interested, I'll give her to you cheap. Cheaper than a broken gear." Ethan looked at the girl again. She was trying to make herself smaller, her silver eyes now full of both fear and something else. Maybe hope, maybe disbelief. "How much?" Ethan asked. The trader gave a price so low it felt insulting. Ethan didn't even argue. He took the credits from his pocket and placed them in the trader's hand. The lock clicked. Open, the trader stepped back, waving at the cage like he was releasing trash. Ethan reached inside and gently touched her arm. The girl flinched as if expecting pain, but instead, he lifted her carefully into his arms. She was lighter than he expected. Her wet hair brushed against his chin. She didn't fight him, but her body stayed tense, ready to run if she could. The marketplace grew quieter as the rain fell harder. People stared at the human carrying a small alien girl through the muddy street. Whispers followed them. Why waste money on that? Humans are strange. Ethan ignored them all. He held her tighter. Her head rested against his chest, and for a moment, she felt the warmth of someone holding her without hurting her. Under a street lamp, she finally spoke in a trembling whisper. "Why?" Ethan looked down at her because no one else did. He said simply. She stared at him for a long moment. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to say more. But she stayed silent. The rain didn't stop as they reached Ethan's small workshop home. On the edge of the city, it was a cluttered place, full of tools, gears, and old machines. He set her down gently on a chair near the heater. Steam rose from her soaked clothes. She kept her hands in her lap. Watching him warily as he moved around, Ethan brought a towel and handed it to her. She didn't take it at first, suspicion in her eyes. Finally, she reached out slowly and took it. The towel felt warm in her hands. She pressed it to her face. Hiding the tears that started again, Ethan didn't ask more questions. He simply began making a pot of hot soup. Behind him, the girl sat quietly, for the first time in weeks. Her tears were noticed, and someone had stepped forward, but in the back of his mind, Ethan knew he had no idea what kind of trouble he had just invited into his life. And outside in the rain, in the shadows of the street, two figures were watching his workshop door. The workshop smelled faintly of metal and oil. Rain still tapped against the roof as Ethan stirred the pot of soup behind him. The alien girl sat perfectly still, her silver eyes never leaving him. It wasn't trust, it was the watchful stillness of someone who had learned that the wrong move could mean pain. He placed the bowl in front of her. Steam rose from it, carrying the warm scent of vegetables and herbs. She hesitated, fingers twitching toward the spoon when she finally took the first bite. She ate so quickly he had to gently place a hand on the bowl. "You'll choke if you don't slow down," he said, his tone calm. Her eyes flicked up to his face. There was no anger there, no threat, just quiet patience. After she finished, Ethan fetched an old blanket from the shelf and wrapped it around her shoulders. The fabric swallowed her small frame. She pulled it tighter as if afraid someone would take it away for a while. Neither of them spoke, only the rain filled the silence. Finally, Ethan said, "What's your name?" Her lips moved before she seemed to realize it. "Lyra," she whispered. He nodded. "Lyra." "I'm Ethan." The moment felt strange, like the first step onto a fragile bridge between two distant worlds. She lowered her eyes and murmured, "You shouldn't have taken me." "Why not?" Ethan asked, leaning on the counter. Her voice was so soft he had to lean closer to hear. "They'll come for me." Ethan frowned. "Who?" But before she could answer, a heavy knock rattled the workshop door. Ethan glanced toward it. Two shadows moved behind the frosted glass window. He motioned for Lyra to stay silent when he opened the door. Two alien traders stood outside. Same ones from the market. Rainwater dripped from their coats. The taller one smiled without warmth. "Human. We noticed you took the girl. You got her for almost nothing. We're wondering if you'd like to sell her back for profit this time." Ethan's voice was steady. "Not for sale." The shorter trader's smile tightened. "You don't understand. She's special." The taller one leaned forward. "And dangerous. If you keep her." Ethan stepped into the doorway, blocking their view inside. "I think you should leave," he said. For a moment, the air between them was tense. Then the taller trader chuckled. "Fine. Keep her, but remember, when she brings trouble, it won't just be yours." They walked away into the rain. Ethan shut the door and locked it. When he turned back, Lyra was no longer on the chair. He found her crouched in the corner behind the workbench, her blanket wrapped tightly around her. "I told you," she said, her voice breaking. "They'll come." Ethan crouched beside her. "Why? What do they want?" Her hands trembled as she pulled back part of her sleeve. There, hidden beneath the folds of fabric, was a faint glowing mark on her skin. It wasn't a tattoo, it looked alive, shifting faintly like liquid light. "This," she said, "isn't decoration, it's a memory crystal. My people hid it in me before the raiders came." Ethan stared. "What's on it?" Her eyes filled with tears again. "Proof of what they did. Proof of the raids, the burnings, the killing." Her voice cracked at the last word. Ethan sat back, running a hand over his face. It made sense why they called her worthless in public, but wanted her back in private. She wasn't just a slave to them, she was a dangerous witness. "Then we make sure they never find you," he said finally. Her eyes widened. You'll help me?" Ethan gave a short nod. "You're under my roof now, Lyra. That makes you my responsibility." That night, he set up a small bed for her in the corner. But she didn't sleep much. She lay awake, listening to the sound of his slow breathing. From the other side of the room, every creak outside made her flinch. And each time she did, she saw his shadow move, checking the windows, making sure the door was still locked. In the middle of the night, she quietly asked, "Why?" He didn't answer right away. Finally, in the dark, he said, "Because no one should be left alone in the rain, outside, far beyond the workshop." The two traders met with a third figure. This one wore a long black coat. A cold voice said, "The human has her. Bring them both. Alive, if possible." The morning came slowly. Soft light pushed through the cracked windows of Ethan's workshop. Dust particles floated in the golden beams, and the sound of rain had finally stopped. The air was still damp and cold. Lyra woke up before Ethan. She sat up on the small blanket bed he had made for her for a few moments. She just watched him sleeping in a chair, head leaning against the wall. His hands were still loosely holding an old pistol. Even in sleep, he was ready for trouble. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself and looked around the room. The walls were lined with shelves full of strange human tools, gears, and machine parts on a nearby table. A broken mechanical arm lay next to a steaming kettle. She could smell something faintly sweet in the air, and then her stomach growled. Loudly, she pressed her hands over it. Embarrassed, Ethan's eyes opened instantly. He looked at her for a moment, then at the small kettle. "Hungry?" he asked, his voice still rough from sleep. She didn't answer at first. Finally, she gave a tiny nod. Ethan stood, stretching his stiff shoulders, and went to the kitchen corner within minutes. He placed a plate of bread and a bowl of warm porridge in front of her. She stared at it like it was a trick. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the spoon when she took the first bite. Her eyes widened. It was warm, soft, and tasted of honey. She ate quickly, too quickly. Her hands moved fast, scooping food as if someone might snatch it away. Ethan reached out gently, placing his hand on the edge of the bowl. "Easy. There's more," he said softly. She froze, eyes darting to his face. It was the first time in years she had heard someone say that there's more. You don't have to fight for it. Slowly, she began to eat at a normal pace. Between bites, she glanced at him. He was leaning against the counter, sipping tea, not watching her like a possession, but like someone making sure she was okay. When she finished, Ethan gave her a second piece of bread. She took it with both hands and whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was so small, it almost disappeared in the air. Ethan simply nodded. "You're welcome." A few moments later, she said. "Ethan," he looked up. "My people. They didn't abandon me," she said quickly, as if afraid to lose courage. "The traitors told you that." He guessed. She nodded. "They lied. My family tried to hide me when the raiders came, but they found me anyway." Her voice cracked. "They killed anyone who resisted. And when they found the crystal inside me, they laughed. They said I was worth more as a bargaining chip." Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't interrupt, letting her speak. "They sold me to others. Again and again. No one cared. I stopped talking after a while. Stopped crying too." Her silver eyes lowered. "Until last night, silence settled in the room. Then Ethan said quietly, I don't know how far your people are, or if we can reach them. But I know one thing. They're wrong about you." Being worthless, she looked at him, confusion flickering across her face. He continued, "You're alive. And as long as you're alive, you're worth protecting." Before she could respond, a sharp knock echoed through the door. Both froze. Ethan moved quickly. Gesturing for her to stay behind the workbench, he grabbed his pistol and walked to the door. When he opened it, there was no one there, only a small metal container on the doorstep. He picked it up carefully and brought it inside. The lid clicked open with a hiss. Inside was a single slip of paper in alien script. Ethan couldn't read it, but Lyra could. Her hands shook as she translated aloud. "Return the girl before sunset. Or we come for both of you." Ethan's face hardened. "Looks like they're done talking," he muttered. Lyra swallowed hard. "They'll find us, Ethan." "They always do." "Then we make sure they can't," he said. Moving to a large cabinet, he began packing food, tools, water. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere they won't expect," he replied. He handed her a small hooded cloak from the back of the cabinet. "Put this on. Keep your head down." As she obeyed, Ethan loaded his pistol and checked an old rifle from the corner. Lyra's hands clutched the cloak tightly. Her stomach was still warm from the food, but her chest felt heavy with fear. Outside, she could hear faint sounds, the slow hum of a ship engine hovering above the city. Ethan glanced at her and said, "We leave before they get brave enough to knock again." The sun was barely rising when they stepped out. The streets were quiet, but shadows moved on rooftops. Lyra stayed close behind Ethan for the first time since she had met him. She felt something like hope, but it was a fragile hope, and in the distance, someone was already watching them. Go, asterisk, the morning air was cold. A pale fog drifted through the narrow streets as Ethan and Lyra moved quietly toward the city's outer edge. Ethan's eyes scanned every shadow, every rooftop. Lyra kept her hood low, her small hands gripping the edge of his coat so she wouldn't lose him in the mist. They had barely turned a corner when Ethan noticed something. A figure leaning against a wall, pretending to smoke. The man's eyes flicked toward Lyra for only a second, but that was enough for Ethan. He put a hand on her shoulder, steering her down a side alley. "Keep walking. Don't look back," he whispered. The alley smelled of rust and wet stone. Old pipes ran along the walls, dripping water onto the cracked pavement. Lyra's voice trembled. "They've found us, haven't they?" Ethan didn't answer. His silence was confirmation enough. Halfway through the alley, a tall shadow stepped into their path. Another appeared behind them. The one in front spoke in a low, smooth voice. "Human, we don't want to hurt you. Hand over the girl and walk away." Lyra's grip on Ethan's coat tightened until her knuckles turned pale. Ethan's tone was calm but firm. "Not happening." The man tilted his head. "You have no idea what you're protecting. That girl is a key to things bigger than you can imagine." "I don't care," Ethan replied. "She's under my roof. That's all that matters." For a second, the man's smirk faded. Then he signaled with his hand. Two more shapes appeared from the mist. Ethan pulled Lyra behind him, his pistol now in his hand. Before the strangers could move closer, the distant wail of a siren echoed through the streets. It wasn't police, was the city's early market bell. The sound distracted the men for a moment. Ethan used it, pulling Lyra into a narrow side passage barely wide enough for two people. They ran, the sound of footsteps chasing them growing louder. They emerged into a crowded street where vendors were setting up stalls. Ethan bent down and whispered to Lyra, "Blend in. Stay close." They weaved between people carrying baskets and crates. The smell of fresh bread and roasted grain mixed with a tension in the air. Each time Lyra glanced back, she saw a shadow moving through the crowd after them. Ethan spotted an old friend's shop, a dusty repair store with faded paint. He pushed the door open and guided Lyra inside. A short, broad-shouldered man looked up from behind the counter. "Ethan, haven't seen you in months." "What's no time?" Ethan interrupted. "We need the back room," without another word. The man nodded and locked the front door. The back room smelled of oil and machine grease. Shelves stacked with broken devices lined the walls. Ethan crouched beside Lyra. "They won't stop until they get you." "I need to know everything," he said. She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the door as if expecting it to burst open. Then she slowly pulled back her sleeve again. The faint glowing mark on her arm pulsed softly in the dim light. "My people hid the memory crystal inside me. Not just data, It has voices. Images proof of the massacres the raiders committed. Her voice shook. They burn entire settlements. Then erase all records so no one can blame them but my father. He was a council leader. He recorded everything. Ethan's jaw tightened. And they know you have it, he said. She nodded. They've been hunting me for over a year. They keep me alive because destroying the crystal might damage the data. But anyone who protects me becomes a target. Ethan leaned back, his mind racing. He knew keeping her meant drawing the attention of people who could easily kill them both, but leaving her wasn't an option. I've had worse odds, he said finally. Lyra blinked, not sure whether to believe him. Before she could respond, the shopkeeper entered the back room, his face pale. There are 3 men outside asking about a human and a small alien girl, he whispered. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Do they look friendly? The shopkeeper snorted. Not unless friendly means armed. Ethan took a deep breath. We're leaving through the back. Can you stall them? The man nodded without hesitation as Ethan and Lyra slipped out through the rear door into the alley. They heard muffled voices at the front of the shop. The shopkeeper's voice was calm but firm, buying them precious seconds. The alley opened into a series of abandoned warehouses. Ethan led her into one, shutting the heavy metal door behind them. Inside, the smell of dust and rust filled the air. They moved quietly between old crates until they found a corner. Hidden from the windows, Lyra looked at him, her voice small. Why are you doing this? You could have given me to them and been safe. Ethan met her eyes. Safe isn't worth much if you have to throw someone to the wolves to get it. For the first time, her lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. It was small, fragile, but real. Before Ethan could say anything more, the sound of heavy boots echoed outside the warehouse. Shadows moved past the broken windows. A voice called out, "We know you're in there." Ethan checked his pistol and motioned for her to stay. Lo, the hunters were closing in, and this time there would be no crowd to hide in. The warehouse was silent except for the slow creak of the roof in the cold wind. But outside, Ethan could hear them. Boots crunching on gravel, quiet whispers, the faint metallic click of weapons being readied. He turned to Lyra, crouched in the shadows behind a stack of crates. Her hood had fallen back, revealing her silver eyes wide with fear. "Stay here," he whispered. She shook her head quickly. "No. I'm not staying without you." Ethan didn't argue. He knew separating now was suicide. The hunters' voices grew closer. Ethan moved to a side wall, where rust had eaten through parts of the metal. He quietly worked the edge of a loose sheet, peeling it back just enough for them to slip through. The cold morning air hit their faces as they stepped into the narrow gap between the warehouse and the old rail yard. "Go," Ethan urged. They slipped into the maze of abandoned train cars, each one covered in rust and graffiti. Their boots made almost no sound on the damp gravel. Lyra's small footsteps matched his. She kept glancing over her shoulder, her breathing shallow. From behind them came the echo of a hunter's voice. "There in the yard, fan out." Ethan swore under his breath, pulling Lyra toward a low-maintenance tunnel under the tracks. The tunnel smelled of oil and water, the floor slick beneath their feet. Ethan kept one hand on her shoulder. Guiding her quickly through, they emerged, near the far fence. But the fence wasn't the safety he'd hoped for. 2 armed hunters stood guard at the only exit. Ethan pulled Lyra back into cover, thinking fast. He scanned the yard, his eyes falling on a half-broken control panel nearby. If he could get to it, he might be able to move one of the heavy cargo cranes to block the hunter's line of sight. He knelt beside Lyra. "Stay here. No matter what happens, don't run until I say." She grabbed his sleeve, whispering, "Ethan, please come back." He gave a quick nod and slipped away. The hunters were focused on the exit, scanning the open yard. Ethan reached the panel. Wiping away dust and flicking the main switch, the ancient machine groaned to life, the sound echoing. Across the yard, the crane arm began to swing. Pulling a massive container into the air, the hunters looked up just enough for Ethan to move. He sprinted back to Lyra, grabbing her hand. Now? They ran, boots slapping against the gravel. The crane's swinging arm blocked the hunter's line of fire for only a few seconds, just enough for them to slip past the fence. Beyond the fence lay the outer forest, tall black pines stretched upward, their branches heavy with mist. Ethan didn't stop until they were deep among the trees. The damp earth muffled their footsteps, but the forest also felt too quiet. No birds, no wind, just an unnatural stillness. Lyra finally slowed, clutching her side, her breath coming fast. Ethan scanned the area before letting her rest. "We can't stay long," he said. "They'll have trackers." She sat on a moss-covered log, pulling the cloak tighter around her. "I'm slowing you down," she said quietly. Ethan shook his head. "You're the reason we're moving at all." "Don't forget that." She gave him a small look, something between gratitude and disbelief. But before she could speak, a faint worry noise drifted through the trees. Ethan looked up. A small hunter drone hovered between the branches, its red lens scanning the ground. He moved fast. Pulling her into the hollow of a fallen tree, the drone floated closer, its red light sweeping over the undergrowth. Ethan's hand rested on his pistol. If it got too close, he'd have to shoot, but the shot would give away their position. The drone passed just meters away, its lens pausing for a long, tense second before it moved on. They waited until the sound faded completely. Only then did Ethan help her out of the hollow. The forest floor sloped downward until they reached a shallow stream. Ethan knelt and scooped water into his hands, drinking quickly before letting Lyra do the same. The icy water cleared her head. But as she looked up, her expression froze. On the far bank of the stream, a tall figure stood watching them, not a hunter, but someone cloaked, their face hidden. Ethan reached for his pistol. The figure raised a hand, slowly, not in threat, but in warning, then pointed deeper into the forest before vanishing into the mist. Lyra's voice was small. "Who was that?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Don't know. But I think they want us to move." They followed the direction, weaving between trees until they found a narrow, hidden path. The sounds of the hunters faded behind them, replaced by the quiet rustle of the forest. After an hour, they reached a small clearing where an old cabin stood, half covered in vines. It looked abandoned, but inside it was dry and stocked with a few dusty supplies. Ethan closed the door and checked the windows before finally letting them rest. Lyra sat by the cold fireplace, her knees drawn to her chest. She looked up at him, her voice trembling. "They won't stop, Ethan. They'll hunt us forever." He crouched down, meeting her eyes. "Then we make sure forever isn't theirs to decide." Outside, far beyond the trees, a hunter's communicator crackled there off the main trail. "But we'll find them, asterisk." The cabin was quiet. Only the sound of the wind moving through the forest filled the air. Ethan sat near the window, keeping watch while Lyra rested by the fireplace. She had barely touched the stale bread he'd found in the cupboard. Her silver eyes were dull, her breathing slower than normal. "You're not eating," Ethan said without looking away from the window. Lyra's voice was weak. "I don't feel hungry." He turned toward her, his gaze sharpening. Her skin was pale, and there was a faint shiver in her small frame. He crouched beside her, pressing the back of his hand to her forehead. It was warm, too warm. "You've got a fever," he muttered. She tried to push his hand away. "I'll be fine," she whispered. But even her voice sounded fragile. Ethan shook his head. "You won't be fine if we don't treat this." He searched the cabin, but found nothing, no medicine, no clean water. The little they had brought from the city was running low. They couldn't stay here, but moving with her sick would be dangerous. He sat back, his mind racing. They had, maybe one day before the fever got worse, before he could decide. A faint humming sound drifted through the trees. Not the deep engine of a ship, this was lighter, like a hovering scout drone. Ethan's jaw tightened. They're close again. He whispered. He packed what little food they had, wrapped Lyra in her blanket, and helped her stand. Her legs were unsteady. "I can walk," she insisted. But after just a few steps, she leaned heavily against him. Without another word, he lifted her into his arms. Her weight was almost nothing. Still, her head rested. Weakly against his shoulder, they left the cabin through the back. Following a narrow deer trail deeper into the forest, the path twisted between black pines and moss-covered rocks. Each step took them further from the hunter's butt, also further from any help. After an hour, Ethan felt her temperature rising even more. Her breathing was shallow now. He stopped beside a fallen tree and laid her down. She blinked up at him, her voice barely audible. "Ethan, they catch us. Leave me." His hands froze as he was adjusting her blanket. "I'm not leaving you," he said firmly. Her lips trembled. "You could survive if I'm not leaving you," he repeated, his tone final, before she could reply. The crunch of footsteps came from the west. Low voices followed too close. Ethan scooped her up again. Moving silently through the trees, the voices grew louder. They were seen heading this way. Search every path. He spotted a narrow gap between two large boulders. Pushing through, he found a small cave hidden by vines. It was damp and smelled of earth. But it was shelter. He placed Lyra inside, then crouched at the entrance. From the shadows, he watched two hunters pass by. One stopped, scanning the area with a handheld device. Ethan's finger rested on the trigger of his pistol, but after a tense moment, they moved on, their voices fading into the distance. When the forest was quiet again, he returned to Lyra. She was shivering despite the blanket, her eyes half closed. "We can't keep running like this," he murmured, more to himself than to her. He decided to risk lighting a small fire at the back of the cave. The flames cast a warm glow on the damp stone walls. He boiled some water from a stream nearby and mixed it with crushed herbs he'd found growing in the forest. It wasn't medicine, but it might help lower her fever. As he held the cup to her lips, she drank slowly, her gaze never leaving his face. "Why?" she whispered again. "Why do you care so much? You don't even know me." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "Because I know what it's like to be left behind," he said quietly. Her eyes softened, but before she could speak, a sudden rustle came from outside. Ethan doused the fire instantly. The cave plunged into darkness. He moved to the entrance, his body tense. Two silhouettes appeared through the vines, hunters, their rifles slung across their backs, speaking in low tones. One of them stepped closer. Brushing the vines aside, Ethan's muscles tightened, ready to strike, but a sharp whistle echoed from somewhere deeper in the forest. The hunters froze, listening. Then one said, "Change of orders." "Pull back." They turned and disappeared into the trees. Ethan waited several minutes before relaxing. Whoever had given that whistle had just saved them. But he didn't know if it was a friend or another player in this dangerous game. When he returned to Lyra, she was already asleep. Her breathing was still shallow, but her face looked a little less pale in the faint moonlight. Ethan sat beside her, keeping his pistol close. He didn't know if they could make it through another day like this. But he knew one thing. Until she was safe, he wasn't stopping. Outside, far in the darkness, a cloaked figure stood watching the cave. They turned and vanished into the night, leaving only the sound of the wind through the pines. The forest was quiet again. Too quiet. Ethan had been awake all night, keeping watch at the cave entrance while Lyra slept. Her fever had gone down slightly, but she was still weak. The first pale light of dawn filtered through the vines, turning the mist a ghostly white. He glanced at her, still sleeping. Her small hands curled under her chin and made a decision. They couldn't hide forever. The hunters would keep searching until they found them. The only way out was to take the fight to them, at least make them think twice about chasing. When Lyra woke, she tried to sit up. "You should be resting," Ethan said. Handing her a small piece of bread. "I'm fine," she whispered. Though her voice betrayed her exhaustion, he crouched beside her, meeting her eyes. "Lyra, I need to know, can that memory crystal be taken out without harming you?" She hesitated. "Yes, but it has to be done by someone skilled. If they try, they might destroy it." "Or me," Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then we keep it in you until we reach someone who can use it. And we make sure the right people see what's inside." She looked at him as if trying to believe it was possible, but deep inside, part of her already did. They left the cave at sunrise. The forest was heavy with dew, the ground soft underfoot. Ethan carried her part of the way until she insisted on walking. It was slow going, but they were heading toward the human colony's southern watch post. If they reached it, they'd be under human protection. If, by midday, the sound of engines broke the calm, 2 low-flying hunter crafts skimmed over the treetops. Scanning the ground, Ethan pulled Lyra into the shadow of a fallen tree. "They're sweeping the area. We can't stay in one place," he said. They moved again, ducking between thickets and crossing shallow streams to throw off trackers. But luck doesn't last forever. The sharp whine of an energy weapon cut through the air. A shot exploded into the tree trunk inches from Ethan's head. "Run!" he barked, pulling Lyra behind him. They tore through the forest, branches whipping at their faces. The hunters' voices echoed behind them, closer with every step. Ethan spotted an old watchtower on a ridge ahead. It was crumbling, but its height might give them an advantage. He hauled Lyra up the steps 2 at a time. Setting her down near the top, "Stay low," he ordered, raising his rifle. The first hunter appeared below, weapon ready. Ethan fired. The shot echoing through the trees. The man dropped, but more followed. Energy bolts smashed into the wood, splinters flying. Then, just as the hunters began surrounding the tower, a sharp, piercing whistle cut through the chaos. It was the same sound from the night before. Ethan froze, eyes scanning the forest. From the shadows stepped the cloaked figure. They moved like a ghost, striking the hunters with quick, precise blows. 2 fell instantly. Their weapons kicked away. Ethan didn't waste the chance. He jumped down from the tower, covering the stranger as they pushed the remaining hunters back. Within minutes, the survivors retreated into the trees, their shouts fading. The cloaked figure lowered their hood, revealing a woman with sharp, weathered features and amber eyes. "I've been tracking you," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "You're carrying proof that could expose half the Raider network." Ethan glanced at Lyra, who was staring wide-eyed. "You know about the crystal?" he asked. The woman nodded. "I can get it to people who will use it, but you'll have to trust me."